Hi there, welcome to video number 6 for scene 6. Still out here in my garden. Some of the obviously magic of these videos might be erased by the fact that I'm just making them one after another, but I'm not doing scene 7 yet, so who knows where the next one will be. Somewhere exciting, I bet. Let's have a look at scene 6, which is the date between Mitch and Blanche. So scene 6 starts at 2 a.m. and Blanche and Mitch arrive from their date, which we don't get to see. But one thing we do get to see, or that Williams wants to kind of convey to us very, very early on, is that this date has been a disaster. So if you look at the stage directions and the adverbs, that always gives you a clue about mood, doesn't it? That's what I always tell you to look at, the verbs and adverbs in the stage directions. Blanche is laughing grimly and stopping lifelessly at the steps. Mitch laughs uneasily and then he speaks heavily, and then later on he shuffles and coughs a little. This is not the sort of verbs and adverbs, this is not the sort of behaviour that signifies a successful date. So straight away you can see conflict in a way, can't you, between these two characters, that if we want to describe awkwardness as a kind of conflict, which I suppose it is, isn't it? It's like a conflict of kind of social interaction. And what's interesting as well is that they openly admit what a disaster the date has been. Where Mitch kind of admits it. I'm afraid you haven't gotten much fun out of this evening, Blanche. I spoiled it for you. No, you didn't, but I felt all the time that I wasn't giving you much entertainment. I mean, this is really, really awkward, isn't it? Not only have they had a bad date, now they're analysing it and talking about why they've had such a bad date and arguing over whose fault it was, in terms of, it was my fault, I've been terrible on this date. No, it was me, I've been awful. What a terrible date that is. There's lots of language in the verbs in terms of like fun, spoiled, try, where you can really see that this date has been a disaster. Strangely though, Blanche invites Mitch in and the awkwardness continues. So again, Williams really wants to spin out this awkwardness between Blanche and Mitch. Think about why he's doing that. We've just had a scene where Blanche has tried to be honest with Stella about how, yes, she's being a bit cynical with Mitch, but she's had such a terrible time with men that this really is her last chance, and she just wants a solid man. Doesn't matter if she loves him, she just wants to rest with him. And now we're really seeing kind of the price that Blanche is willing to pay for that, which is to kind of continue this really boring, awkward date with this kind of man-child, really. And I think that is the right description. Look at the way Blanche talks to Mitch. Another good thing to always look at in this play is epithets. What do people call each other? So when she called the young man Honey Lamb, then we knew that she was kind of predatory of him. She calls Mitch Honey, and then she calls him Good Boy when he gets the door open. And she keeps calling him Honey, doesn't she? And I'm sure there was another thing. Oh, now I've lost it. But look at the way she's talking to him. There's a few examples there anyway. The fact that she says good boy, the fact that she keeps saying no honey, that's this, no honey, it's that. It's quite patronising, isn't it? And it's that idea that she does, in her language, perhaps see him as kind of, oh, my dog's starting to go mad. I'm going to see if I can continue. My dog will calm down. Hang on. Ruby, come on. My dog is now inside. Apologies. Where was I? Yeah, so Blanche is kind of patronising almost of him, and it really shows that kind of, even through her language, she can't disguise the fact that this is not really what she wants. He's he's awkward and he's kind of childlike, and she kind of treats him as such. I guess the other example of it is that he just doesn't know things that she knows. So if you look at page 61, we're going to be very bohemian. We're going to pretend that we are sitting in a little artist cafe on the left bank in Paris. Well, you know, Mitch is not going to understand what that means, is he? Je suis la dame au camélia, vous êtes un monde. I mean, that's reference to a French opera. Like, Mitch is not going to get that. Understand French? And then Mitch goes, nah, I. And then she even kind of plays on it, and you might interpret this as being even a little bit cruel to him, where she says, voulez-vous coucher avec moi ce soir? Vous ne comprenez pas? Ah, quel dommage. I mean, it's a damn good thing. Like, she's kind of joking with herself, isn't she? She says there, would you like to go to bed with me tonight? Oh, you don't understand me? What a shame. It's like kind of she's dangling her sexuality over him without him knowing it. And it's quite a dark joke, that, isn't it? Because obviously that's the thing she's trying to hide from him. And she's trying to present herself as this virgin who's kind of younger and less experienced, but she can't resist kind of rubbing in the fact that really she's above him intellectually and in class terms. The other really awkward moment is that, like, he asks, can I kiss you goodnight? Why do you always ask me if you may? And then Mitch says something really sweet. He says, I like you to be exactly the way that you are, because in all my experience I have never known anyone like you. Blanche looks at him gravely, then she bursts into laughter and then clasps her hand to her mouth. She like laughs in his face when he's trying to be sincere about kind of his feelings for her. So this date really is full of conflict, isn't it? And it's down to the fact that these two people are not compatible. Blanche sees herself as superior intellectually and in class terms. Mitch kind of knows that he's out of her league, doesn't he? And he's really awkward, shuffling, coughing, asking. I suppose it's not the asking to kiss; it's the kind of awkwardness with which he asks, "Can I kiss you goodnight?" I mean, there are ways to ask, aren't there, which are more enticing than that. I don't know. Maybe I wouldn't know. But there's this whole kind of awkward, kind of almost funny mismatch between the two of them, where they're really on very different levels, aren't they? That continues when they go inside, and it gets even worse. I asked you in the work just to track through all the times that Mitch puts his foot in it and says things that are not appropriate to say, that anyone would know that are not appropriate to say on a date. Let's look at them. Look at, I'm ashamed of the way I perspire. So they're sitting on a bed at 2 a.m. by candlelight after Blanche has explicitly said, we're going to create some romance, and Mitch says, no, I'm going to leave my coat on because I sweat so much. And then he starts talking about what the coat is made of. The coat is made of lightweight alpaca. Look at the way that the word alpaca is repeated. Williams kind of, I know he writes tragedies, but he can be funny when you see this. Just the repetition of that slightly odd word, alpaca, is kind of funny, and he's really going for that idea that this is a terrible, terrible date. They call that stuff alpaca. Oh, alpaca. It's very lightweight alpaca. Oh, lightweight alpaca. I don't like to wear a wash coat, even in summer, because I sweat through it. Oh. Like, this is worse than Mike and Sophia, who at least get along, isn't it, in terms of how boring the conversation is. Then he talks about his physique and the fact that he went to a gym. Then he stands up and says, punch me in the belly. And then he says, guess how much I weigh. Which again is dead childlike, isn't it? That's the sort of thing a child would say, isn't it? Guess how much I weigh. That's the sort of thing like a little kid is concerned with, not a grown man. Guess how much I weigh. And then he says, how much do you weigh? Which is so comically wrong that that's kind of the apex of what's going on here. And then he lifts her up. And then after all of that romance, he tries to just kiss her. But look at the way that that's described. He fumblingly embraces her. Look at, again, his... look at the verbs and adverbs that are used for him. He fumblingly embraces her. He talks embarrassedly about his weight. So again, what we've got here is conflict in the sense that these two people are not compatible with each other. If you're looking at kind of the context, if you want to look at that, we get the biggest indicator yet that Blanche is performing her virginal femininity role, don't we? So in the previous scene, in scene 5, she admitted to Stella that that's what she felt she had to do in order to get Mitch to be interested. She talks about it again here, doesn't she? And again, we've got this idea that a woman has to behave in a certain way if she's going to be respectable, marriage material, and attractive to a man. And again, it's about the unfairness of the expectation, isn't it? So she has to be flirtatious, she has to let him kiss her, but she can't let him go too far. And it's all to do with that Southern Belle thing. And Blanche is sick of being that, isn't she? I think, if we're going to defend Blanche, I think that's why she behaves like this. When she says, "Voulez-vous coucher avec moi ce soir, à quel dommage?" This is someone who's so bored of playing this role of being the Southern Belle that she's just amusing herself at this point. And I can relate to that a little. I think that's at least a bit relatable, isn't it? That she's not doing this to be cruel to Mitch. She's doing it because she has played this role so many times for so many men, and it's so inauthentic to her, and she just now sees it as a chore that she has to get through. She does that later on as well. Like, I guess on the bottom of page 63, I guess it's just that I have old-fashioned ideals. She rolls her eyes knowing that he cannot see her face. It's not necessarily that she's being cruel to Mitch there. I think she's just rolling her eyes because she's so tired of pretending to be a certain thing in order to be good enough to be taken home by Mitch. So again, I feel a bit of sympathy for Blanche here. I think we may... Alright, she is flawed, she's snobbish, she sees herself as better than Mitch, but there is some sympathy for her here, I think. And then, after that, they start getting along, and you wouldn't think at this point, after he's been talking about sweating and trying to kiss her and she's had to batter him away and asking her weight, that by the end of the scene they'll be kissing, but that's what happens. And so Williams changes the mood in the middle of scene 6, and it's because they start talking about Stella and Stanley. So they have something in common now. So from page 63, 64 onwards, the date becomes less awkward. Ironically, because they're talking about Stanley, who's a common interest to both of them. So we see that kind of starting to happen very quickly, and then Blanche again starts to trust Mitch. And at the end of this scene, from page 66 onwards, we get another moment of real, genuine honesty from Blanche. I think there's only 2 or 3 moments of that in this whole play, but here's another one. And it's where she starts talking and telling us about Alan Gray, her first husband, and she tells Mitch this painful, traumatic story. Just to summarise it, because I did ask you to do that, Blanche tells Mitch this story about her first husband. She fell in love with him at 16. Look at the way she describes Alan. There was something different, a nervousness, a softness, a tenderness. Think about those abstract nouns: nervousness, softness, tenderness, which wasn't like a man's, although he wasn't the least bit effeminate looking. Still, that thing was there. That's the closest she gets to this big clue that the problem here has been that Alan was gay. At the bottom of page 66, then I found out in the worst of all possible ways by coming suddenly into a room that I thought was empty, which wasn't empty, but had 2 people in it. And look at, I guess, the use of the word people there is another little clue. I suppose at the end of the 1940s, Williams lived fairly openly with male partners throughout his life. But I suppose that is within a smallish bubble of kind of the theatre scene, especially in New York. Certainly attitudes towards homosexuality in wider society would have been much more kind of negative, and it would have been seen as scandalous and taboo to have talked about homosexuality openly. That's why Williams has had to code it, and that's what he's doing. Look at those abstract nouns: tenderness, softness, the the adjectives different and effeminate. The big clue here is that's been the issue for Blanche. That's why it hasn't worked between Blanche and Earl Grey, and she's caught him with a man. That's also why Blanche, kind of the moment that has ruined Blanche's life. Drunk at the casino, she'd said to him, I know, you disgust me. And that's the moment that that's haunted Blanche for the rest of her life. She feels as though she's responsible then for his suicide. I know, you disgust me. And again, that word disgust is perhaps giving you that sense that this is not just kind of a heterosexual affair. This is something more taboo than that. Something that lots of people would have found disgusting to have talked about or thought about at that time. Look at the metaphors she uses for love. At that moment where he dies, the searchlight which had been turned on the world was turned off again, and never for one moment since has there been any light that's stronger than this kitchen candle. So again, Williams is using that motif of light as a symbol, as a metaphor. Here, light is a symbol for love, isn't it? So Blanche feels that when she met Alan Gray, she loved him so much that there was a light turned on in the world. And when he died, and especially because he died prompted by her, she feels that she's been in the darkness ever since. If you think about the way Williams uses light and darkness in this play, Blanche does stay in the darkness. She avoids the light. She wants to cover over with lampshades the light, doesn't she? She wants to avoid scrutiny. That's one of the big things. Just lastly, before I finish with scene 6, I want to talk very briefly about the kind of sound effects that Williams is using, the stagecraft here. We get a kind of unrealistic moment. If you think about what's happening, page 67, polka music sounds in a minor key, faint with distance. We dance the Varsuviana. We can hear the music that's in Blanche's memory. The Varsuviana is a polka tune. On the sheet that I sent you a link on YouTube, but just Google it, just listen to it. It's a really creepy kind of old polka tune. That's the tune that is kind of haunting Blanche and remaining in her head. And often often we hear that tune, and it represents kind of Blanche's trauma and Blanche's madness later on too. That we actually hear what's going on inside Blanche's head. Just want to talk really briefly about that technique, because it is unusual, isn't it? This play so far has been extremely realistic. Williams is a naturalistic playwright in lots and lots of ways. We have a naturalistic looking set, don't we? We have people talking in dialect. We have people saying the sorts of things that ordinary people would say to an extent. But then we also have kind of unrealistic moments, don't we? We have kind of... Also we have... Sorry, I think there was just someone at the door. Also we have unrealistic moments. So Williams is using two kind of modes of theatre here. He's using realism for most of the play, and then what we would call that, if you do theatre studies, is using techniques of plastic theatre. That's what it's called. It's the idea that you can represent things non-naturalistically. If you're a playwright, you can show us what's real, but you can also show us through things like sound and lighting, moods and things that are in people's heads, and madness and things like that. We'll see that happening more throughout this play, and later on, as Blanche loses her mind, we see Williams using those plastic theatre techniques a lot more to actually show us what Blanche's inner trauma looks and feels and sounds like, as well as actually showing us realistic things. So that's quite an important moment too. When we hear the polka tune that's in Blanche's head, that's Williams doing something unrealistic and plastic to give us that sense of Blanche's kind of feelings. So I think that's everything from scene 6. Apologies for a couple of interruptions there. I guess that's the problem with doing things at home. But that's scene 6. Scene 7, 8, and 9. Next, there'll be a bit of a gap because we've got a week's break. But that's it from me for now. Thank you very much.